Thank you, Mr. Arif. Good evening to all. May I have the honor to welcome Dr. Anuradha, our beloved HOD. And from concept to creation, this conference basically is our concept. And she is a bedrock, anchor, and she is the anchor and backbone of this conference. And she, by her sheer determination, just in design this conference. And yesterday and today, we are having this conference. And I welcome Dr. Anuradha for this, final session or a valedictory session, whatever we call it as. I also welcome Dr. Anandi, the well-known historian, a well-known person, right, both in India and abroad, for accepting to give this special lecture for Loyola College students. And I also welcome all other resource persons, students from both Loyola and outside Loyola, professors, deans, HODs, principals, vice principals, and all others, for attending this very important, very fitting and timely conference. And this particular Dr. Anandi needs no introduction again, but for the better understanding of the students, we are here to introduce Dr. Anandi. And history is all teaches all things, including the future. One simple statement about history is that it teaches the future also. And if you study the past, you can define the future. And therefore, as I said, I always believe that history is who we are, why we are, and the way we are. And therefore, Dr. Anandi is here, so let me, say a few words about Dr. Anandi. And women, that are known for their extraordinary contributions. They are known for their extraordinary contribution to society, and they are known for the remarkable triumphs and unmatched fearlessness. And they continue to thrive, and beat all the odds. And today we have a women HOD in our department, and therefore, and Dr. Anandi is here, and many more women are there. And women, you see, women and the wisdom, in fact, imparts transformation and empowerment. Maybe in India or outside India, but people believe that they can impart, transformation and empowerment. And therefore, history is all of that. History helps us to create a better future. With this, I may have the privilege and honor to introduce our speaker today. Madam has said short profile, but doesn't look like a short profile. It looks, that amazing. And Dr. Anandi is currently a professor at MIDA, the most prestigious institute in Chennai, which adds more prestige to Chennai. And our area of interest is women's history, particularly women's history, women's political participation and cultural politics on women's movement, gender and development, with a focus on state welfare politics. It's very important. Because when you talk about women's participation, cultural politics, and women movement, the concern here is all about the state welfare politics. And Madam also is known for, she is known for caste and gender as identity politics. How in India, that caste and gender has been used as an identity politics. And Madam has a PhD degree from JNU, a prestigious university, with a thesis that has focused on socio-political history of gender relations in colonial South India. That is from 1920 to 1947, very crucial period. This 27 years, Madam, that took examined, in fact, about, the gender relations with regard to social or political history. And that has been, done by Madam and very much commended. And she has been a visiting professor at various universities. To name a few, Nagoya University, Toyota Bunka University in Japan, And also, Madam is a visiting fellow at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, South Asia visiting scholar at the Queen Elizabeth House, University of Oxford, a visiting fellow at the Maison des Sciences at Paris, and many more universities are there. I'm just quoting few universities. Madam has widely published or perish. Madam has widely published in the area of Tamil regional politics and the policies of caste and gender, with reference to Dalit women, Dravidian and Dalit movements in well-known Indian academic journals like Economic and Political Weekly. And there are publications which includes I'll just read out the title of the the publications: Rethinking Social Justice, Dalit Women, Vanguard of an Alternative Politics, the Mahatmas, Gender, Caste, and the Politics of Intersectionality in Rural Tamil Nadu, Gender and Commodity Aesthetics in Tamil Nadu, 1950 to 1917, Periyar's Self-Respect Movement and Women's Question in the Dravidian Movement, representing Devadasis, Dasigal as a radical text, reproductive bodies and regulated sexuality, birth control debates in early 20th century Tamil Nadu, on sexuality and nation, idol and other women in nationalist in Tamil Nadu. So these are the few publications Madam has done. So with this few words, may I just invite Madam. Women have the power to create, nurture, and transform. And I believe Dr. Anandi is again an example here. And there is a saying, nice saying by the prominent author. It says that I believe that the rights of women and girls are the unfinished business of the 21st century. I believe that the rights of women and girls are the unfinished business of the 21st century. With these few words, may I invite Dr. Anandi to inspire, motivate, and empower the young graduates. Thank you so much, and over to Arish. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I begin now?
Yes, madam.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the overwhelming response to this very short lecture, I think. I may not be able to say everything about Dravidian feminism and about the, Sudra subaltern voices of women, particularly in an in-depth way. But however, I will attempt to map the kind of trends and the voices that distinctly produced what I would term as Dravidian feminism. Probably this term is not really in use, but I think the context in which I thought this term acquires a relevance, even in the contemporary context, is also the context in terms of how Dravidian feminism voiced certain resistant politics vis-a-vis the dominant majoritarian nationalist discourse, particularly against the Hindu nationalist discourse. I think it is here that I want to trace back how exactly we need to locate not only the concept of Dravidian feminism, but what it offers to us as a critique of Hindu patriarchy, as a critique of Indian family system, or as a critique that would enable us to locate these critiques in the contemporary context of women's empowerment. So it is in that intention, I wanted to open this lecture for a range of, mapping that I would like to do from the voices of women and from the voices of one of the foremost leaders of the Dravidian movement, that is Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy. Now, the question that comes to us is the context. All historians are concerned about the context. Now, in the 1990s, very significantly, a very important moment for Indian women's movement as well, and also for reconceptualizing feminist understanding of rights and entitlement and the notion of womanhood itself. For instance, in 1995, with the Beijing conference, as many of us know, and many of us have been sort of reading on that, and some of us have been very much actively participated in that particular moment of talking about women's rights. What was important in that particular moment was Dalit women came on the stage of the international forums to say that we don't speak in the same voice as the upper caste women. We speak very differently. Primarily because our interests are different, our experience of violence and patriarchy is different from other women. So, foregrounding the idea of difference, it appears to open the category of women. It became very a kind of a moment which challenged not just the idea of homogenization of women, but it also opened to us the idea that it is time to recognize the multi-layered and difficult nature of social power and resistance. It is no longer fixed in identities, a homogeneous identity, just as women or men as categories. Then there was another moment, which probably all of us can relate, is the moment of anti-mental agitation. At the ushering in of the 1990, 1989, for instance. A large number of young girls coming onto the street in Delhi and very clearly protesting against the Mandal Commission, and also carrying this very clear idea that they are protesting because they don't want to marry backward caste men who are going to be privileged and employed because of the reservation politics. And what stopped them from marrying a backward caste men? It was very clear they wanted to uphold endogamous marriages. So the upper caste women's interest, which was very clearly represented by younger generation of women in the 1990s, revealed to the women's movement that women as a category is punctured with caste, class identities and the structures that mediated their interest. Therefore, the Dalit women's voice justified the idea that the resistant politics is not merely something to resist a abstract notion of patriarchy, but a very clear Brahmanic patriarchy needed to be resisted. Now, all this opened up for us a range of views about how we locate different women's interests in different kind of social structures and their experiences. Here again, I think Ambedkar had to be reread, and I sort of, began to read Ambedkar only in that context, where I found his text on who were the Sudras very, very useful. Because very clearly Ambedkar states, under the system of Saturvarnya, the Sudra is not only placed at the bottom of the gradation, but he is subjected to innumerable ignominies and disabilities so as to prevent him from rising above the condition fixed for him by law. So it's very clear that despite Ambedkar's very detailed account of how the original meaning of Sudra differed from the manner in which they have been rendered powerless as a community, and how this general name with all these indignities have got associated with lower class people, as though it is about lower class people without civilization, without culture, without respect and without position. Now, this got me interested in looking at if we have to theorize a range of women's experiences. It's not necessarily only about Dalit women or about Brahmin women and their location within the Brahmanic patriarchy. I think Tamil Nadu offers a very interesting subaltern history about how Sudra women, as lower caste women, participated in a radical movement to contest Brahmanic patriarchy in a very, very significant way. But before going into that, there is a need to understand what exactly is the distinct experience of Sudra women, how distinct it was. However, it was very close to what Dalit women's experience have been and the sufferings have been. We had to locate new kind of sources. Looking at biographies and autobiographies of men really do not tell much about the condition of the Sudra women and where they are located, what are the kind of sufferings. But very recently, this is again in the post-1990s, I think it's about 2000, the work of Satyanathan's, A.N. Satyanathan's wonderful autobiography, a memoir which has been put out by his granddaughter Uttara Nadarajan, a Sudra story, which tells us very clearly, at least in few pages, what exactly were the condition of the Sudra women that required the attention, that required some kind of understanding about what were they doing, what were their voices like, what were the kind of resistant politics that was coming through. If at all we have to identify subaltern voices, it is through these narratives. Probably we can capture some of them. Let me just read out some bit of the extract from his own memoir. Uh, his village in Surandai village, he's talking about the Sudra life on the whole. And in that, particularly, he talks about his relationship with mother and grandmother, who, according to him, predominantly constituted the workforce, both in the house as well as outside. According to him, he says, it was not unusual to see a young husband in a household like ours beat up his wife mercilessly with anything he could lay hand on, for the simple offense that she did not keep hot water ready for his bath when he returned home in the evening. This resonates with a large number of Sudra households where men expected a very subordinate position of women to perform a labor which was not only unrecognized labor, but it was also a very indignified labor. And the violence that was associated with was very beautifully brought out in his narrative. And he also talks about his sister here. I had begun to notice that my sister herself, hardly 12, was also becoming a victim of this treatment by my father and the violence that was, exuded by him. Uh, my remaining with her or near her was also an embarrassment because at the age of 12, when she was married and her husband continued to do the same thing, and therefore, what he calls as the Sudra women's conditions in this household was such. It was always enmeshed in poverty, quarrels, and domestic miseries. Can the Sudra women of that kind afford propriety? The propriety that has been sort of associated with upper caste women was not really available to Sudra women. Sudra women could not afford to have the gentleness, proprietyness, the chastity that is associated with the so-called Tamil woman. And this is quite very well resonates with a description and a self-description by a Bangladeshi woman around the same time, who in her interview to a feminist economist stated, I quote her, what need have the poor for self-respect or propriety? Everything is dictated by scarcity. Scarcity of food, scarcity of clothes, scarcity of shelter. There is no end of scarcity. There are mothers who cannot feed their children. Can they afford propriety? This is a kind of self-perception that is shared by Sudra women as well, that in a way, it self-deprecated them to a large extent. The struggle to stay alive was central to self-making of the Sudra women. And this became the overriding priority in their life. The female hardship that Satyanathan has talked about in his own memoir is empirically associated with, I restate here, poverty, where women are socially and culturally made to depend on male earnings. However, when men could not afford employment, could not really protect the family or provide for the family, they were often absconding, leaving wife and children to their own miseries. And this is the case that is being narrated by, and this is also about female supported household. This has been well narrated by a well-known Dravidian feminist activist whom you would have heard, Moovalur Ramamirtha Mammal. In her own narratives, in her memoir, she relates to somewhat what Satyanathan has to say, that her father, who was a musician, and mother, they did not oblige the community's demand that the daughter in penury needed to be dedicated as Devadasi. Instead, the parents somehow did not want to dedicate her, had to face not only ostracization of the community, but also had to face enormous penury and poverty. They had to move from one place to another. Finally, they moved to Bangalore, which is where her name is associated with, and where the grandmother of the mother's mother who, despite poverty, voluntarily takes care of this family. And the father, day by day, living in penury, absconds from the village and abandons both the mother and child and runs away to Chennai to work as a cook or servant for 5 rupees later. But he was not to be located. So Ramamurdam's Ammal, the mother, sells Ramamurdam to a Devadasi for some very paltry kind of sum, and this is only 10 rupees, and some for old sari. Now, Ramamurdam Ammal was sold miserably by the mother, and the father has abandoned the house. This is a sense of emasculation of men within the Sudra family, which has made women within these families extremely helpless, especially under poverty, despite their hard labor, both in the house as unpaid laborers and as field workers, as agricultural workers. So this temporary absence of men has been very, very significant in this Sudra household. Now, this is the kind of narrative which tells us that the miserable and the abject condition of the Sudra women required an attention, not just from the point of view of the domestic patriarchy that provided, that sort of led to enormous violence against these women, but it's also the manner in which some of these Sudra families embedded themselves in the dictates of the dominant Hindu religion and ritual practices. And Ramamurdam Ammal beautifully brings out the dominant dictates of the Hindu religion in her own family, living as Devadasi within the community, in the caste of young men and women, how exactly the practice of Devadasi custom very blindly followed rituals that was given out by the Brahmin, religious uh, 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 religious prescriptions. Now, it is here that we need to note that the arrival of the self-respect movement provided a new kind of resistant politics, not only for men, but also for women within the movement. I'm sure all of you are aware of the self-respect movement, but however, I just want to briefly state here what exactly the self-respect movement did in order to contest the endogamous nature of Indian marriage system, particularly in the case of Sudra and all other castes who were following the endogamous marriage practices. What is important here is caste to survive in the Indian society, in the Indian context, fundamental to caste system is the endogamous marriage practice. As Uma Chakravarti has beautifully shown in her conceptualization of Brahmanic patriarchy, what is fundamental to the caste system is endogamous marriage. If the endogamous marriage could be broken, caste system will definitely go away. Now, in order to protect the endogamy, there is this range of prescriptions that were, pronounced by Manu, has become almost a kind of, practiced out custom among several castes. Now, it is this fundamental aspect of protection of caste system through endogamy came under a very sharp critique under the self-respect movement. Now, we all know that the self-respect movement's claim to radical feminism or practice of feminism bordered around new definition of marriage, conjugality, and women's rights. One was the anti-prohibit marriage, and initially all the first weddings conducted by the movement, self-respect movement, were called anti-prohibit weddings. Prohita Marpu Thirumanam. No Brahmin priest should initiate weddings because Brahmin priests reinforce the idea of chastity, the idea of conjugality, the Brahmin nature of the conjugality, which clearly placed importance in the question of genial, the genetic factors, etc. So all these were challenged, and these were the fundamental thing in the anti-prohibit weddings. So therefore, the Hindu weddings came under a very critical scrutiny of the self-respect movement. The Sastric requirement of Hindu traditions were no Sanskrit utterances, no religious ceremonies to be followed, no tali tying, ceremony, and which is symbolized obviously the transfer of bride to affinal family and as boundary setting in conjugality, and therefore a subordinate position of women. All this came under a very sharp criticism of the movement. It is not only the criticism of the movement, but it's also how it was practiced out and adapted by a large number of non-Brahmin families which came under the influence of the self-respect movement. Sorry, is there some interruption or can I go ahead? Yeah?
Please go ahead, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah. Then the other aspect of the self-respect movement, as we all know, is about the inter-caste marriage, inter-jati and inter-religious marriages, which were very widely practiced. So therefore, what was fundamental to the self-respect movement here was marriage as a political event to propagate ideals of women's liberation, reproductive choice for women, to talk about drudgery of domesticity, bigamy, women's property rights, women's political rights in the public sphere, equal right to work and wages. So the marriage platform was completely converted into agenda setting for women's liberation. So this was very well utilized by a large number of self-respect activists, women activists, which we all know, starting with Tiruchi Neelavadi, Kunjidam Kuriswamy, Satyavani Muthu in much later stage, more particularly Ramamurdam Ammal, whose activism was a kind of a benchmark within the self-respect movement. I'll come to that little later. What is important here in this new model of conjugality advocated through self-respect movement was a widespread participation of women and the centrality of the women's participation, which turned the weddings as political events. And therefore, they could politicize conjugality. A lot of women wrote about birth control as women's choice, which differed with the Indian nationalist discourse about birth control, which aligned with the discourse about population control. By then, in the 1930s, the self-respect movement women activists began to articulate the idea reproductive choice is primarily women's choice. And motherhood and the reification of motherhood is a myth that we need to challenge it. Now, what I found in reading a lot of Periyar's own discourse, that much of the imaginative way in which Shudra women engaged with and also transcended some of Periyar's own discourse about women's liberation is far more empirically located in their own experience of patriarchy and the movement politics in which they enmeshed themselves. So, if you read, a lot of translation has come out now, but also the original text in Kudiyarasu and Vidupalai others. What is the important thing that the Sudra women are talking about is marriage is only a contract. And one needs to reject the traditional notion of permanency attached to marriage and reject the sacramental values of marriage. And rationalization of conjugal norms involves a kind of a secular, non-sacramental, contractual relationship, which they called as life contract. And there has to be also, they demanded that there should be an ample space for breaking incompatible marriage. And where we find the legislation that was coming up for restitution of conjugal rights was taken far ahead with the idea of contractual marriage right in the Madras Legislative Assembly and the Justice Party and by the movement practitioners, particularly women who have agitated for contractual marriage. And there was also emphasis on companionship in marriage and bodily pleasures, which, something was considered to be a taboo, that women in the self-respect movement found forums to talk about women's bodily and sexual pleasures and commitment to conjugal equality and so on. Now, while not denying the argument that self-respect marriage in the later time also aligned with the national anxiety, that is the Dravidian national community making and the making of a Tamil modernity as a discourse, but self-respect marriage as such provided an important forum, and it was a critical site for articulation of a Dravidian feminist ideals of conjugality, family, and women's freedom, and that was really critical of Brahmanic patriarchy. Now, I want to say here something very distinctly about how exactly the voices of Ramamurthy Ammal, which I consider as one of the significant voice in the movement. For shortage of time, I'm not going into other voices and representation. Now, I already said something about Ramamurthy Ammal. uh, Ramamurthy Ammal never had a formal education, and she was only self-educated to read and write Tamil, and a self-made intellectual, what we would call in Gramsci's term as an organic intellectual, who, within the self-respect movement, authored several essays regularly on the condition of women, and particularly on the Devadasi system and the need for abolition of the Devadasi system. And she also wrote a very fictional series in 1945 in Kavida Nadu, and this appeared much later. Um, and other than being a writer, what was also very important is that despite making a break with her Congress activism, coming out with Periyar, and being a forerunner in the movement, in 1949, she made a very significant break with the movement and joined Annadurai and others. And for several reasons, of course, she differed with Periyar on the question of, the right of Maniammai becoming, inheritors of the movements, and then the trust. Now, one of the important thing here is ராமாமிர்தமையார்'s semi-autobiographical novel, ராசிகள் மோசவலை அல்லது மதிப்பெற்ற மைனர். I think everyone should read this both in Tamil, and its translation is also available, done by Kalpana Kandagram and others. She was totally a rebel, and in the 20th century, women's intellectual arena, women entry into intellectual arena itself as writers and journalists was very, very limited, and very few Sudra women could write full-length novels and get them published. And what is significant here is the fact that most of these writings by women, if you look at the Brahmin women and the middle class women, they always valorize the traditional womanly virtues. The best example is Jagan Mohini article by Vaimu Kodai Nagi Ammal and others. This was in contrast to what Muvalu Ramamurthy Ammal as a Sudra woman wrote, who completely reversed some of the glorification of chastity, obedience to husband, home as the
Anandi ma'am? Dr. Anandi? So participants, kindly wait. I think there's some net connectivity issue with her.
I'm really sorry. The internet keeps going during the evening.
Yes, not an
Really
issue,
sorry
ma'am.
about
Not an
it.
issue. Yeah.
Let me
We just lost the last part of what you were
reconnect
saying,
with
ma'am.
what I've been trying to talk. It's mainly about Ramamirtha Ammal's reflection on how exactly she saw the complexities of working of the Brahmanic patriarchy in the context of Devadasis. So what she had to say in the right at the beginning of the novel is very telling of her commitment to anti-Brahminism and also the critique of the Congress party at that time, primarily because Satyamurthy and others decided to oppose the legislation. It is in this context she wrote, "My strong opinion is that from the ancient times, the temple priests, the king, and the landlords, in the name of art, had encouraged particular communities to indulge in prostitution. These days, more than the Kumbakonam Sastris, the Brahmin priest of Orthodox Kumbakonam town, Satyamurthy Sastri, the Congress leader, has been making noise about preserving Devadasi custom. Our women have been suppressed in all spheres, and she means basically the Sudra women. The legitimization of the suppression given through religion and sastras is evident in the manner in which women have been assigned the role of prostitutes therefore, through the Pottarapu Sangam, that is abolition of the Devadasi custom, and through the Nagapashatar Sangam, this is the one that she started, she was the forerunner in starting the Isavelala Sangam as well. I have propagated the anti-Devadasi message, for which among the Devadasi community itself, there were opposition. She is referring to the 356 Devadasi signatories here as Devadasi agents. Prominent religious heads, Devadasi agents, reform leaders, everybody openly opposed my stand. Then I decided that it is easy to oppose imperialism and Brahmanism, but not the Devadasi system. So this is how it was a very candid kind of a critique of Brahmin patriarchy, particularly the way in which it came as obstruction in the case of Devadasi abolition as such. Now, looking at the very life as resistance in the case of Ramamirtham, and it's very beautifully brought out in a recent biography by Jeeva Sundari. As I said earlier, living under penury, Ramamirtham, was abandoned literally at the care of a Devadasi woman who tried her best to dedicate her to the temple. And it is during that very moment of dedication, what Ramamirtham did was that she appealed to her music teacher, Swayambhu Pillai, and very clearly said that she was not interested in being dedicated as a Devadasi woman because she felt it is something, not a choice, something that has been binding them through a particular kind of patriarchal compulsion, and she demanded that Swayambhu Pillai marries her. And here, it is not that Ramamirtham Ammal idealized monogamy as such. She was very clear that the option available to her was, at the age of 12, either that she gets dedicated and survives through, Achikanu, the woman who adopted her, the Devadasi woman, survives through the wealth of Achikanu and further, being part of, being a concubine of landlords in Mailadurai, where she belonged to. Otherwise, marry Swayambhu Pillai. The options were very limited, and she didn't want to suffer indignation, poverty, and lack of financial help, with other relatives who were not willing to take her. And what happened was, while very cleverly Ramamirtham, very subtly, this is where the subaltern politics of a Sudra woman was really, sort of very explicit in her resistance. She was learning Sanskrit. She was not opposed to learning music. She was also learning Puranas. All that helped her to make a critique of the critique of Brahmin patriarchy in her later years in the self-respect movement as such. And in fact, one of her concrete critique of Hinduism emerged out of referring to Sanskrit texts because of her very ability to read the Sanskrit text and critically engage with them. Now, after the temple wedding, she of course faced a social boycott, several indignities, and what was interesting is that she did not deter from propagating against the Devadasi system. in the very village and in the towns where there were predominantly there was a large number of Devadasis who were dedicated to temple, and they were practicing concubinage in this area. Now, at one stage, when she was carrying out this from the Congress platform, some Hindu Sanatanists got onto the stage and cut her hair, saying that, this is the way that we would like to humiliate you and discourage you from getting onto stage and propagating, anti-Brahmanism on stages. And interestingly, the story goes that Ramamurdam never grew her hair after that, and she kept her hair very short, and she made it a symbol of resistance. And this is the kind of symbols of resistance that we find that Sudra women adapted as part of feminist ideals and resistant politics as such. That I wanted to highlight, and also wanted to show that the range of activities carried out by Dravidian Sudra women border around such resistant politics. In fact, very interestingly, Ramamurdam again, who was part of in the Congress, of course, she was someone who led, many other Congress activists, including Satyamurthy, who had to be, sort of under her Zilla committee and in the All India Committee Congress membership, etc. And she was selling khadi everywhere, propagating abolition of the Devadasi practice within the Congress. It is a very surprise that when she left Congress party and joined Periyar in the right at the Kanjipuram conference, primarily not because of Gandhi, of course, had taken up the cause of Devadasi abolition, but primarily because communal representation was not happening in the Congress. On that ground, in a very political sense, Ramamurdam left Congress. In a very similar way, she left Periyar's Dravida Kazhagam and joined the Dravidian movement, primarily because she felt that there was a reduction of women's rights issues to a large extent towards agenda of the Dravidian identity making. So her memoir itself shows that this dissident politics was very bold and a very deviant way, and in a way it brought out salient features of Dravidian feminism. Along with this, what we also find, the solidarity that she expressed for Adi Dravidas, which had a very important kind of part of her political activism. Often she persuaded them in her own village to clothe themselves full, and she would sell free of cost of her khadi clothes to the Adi Dravidas and make them march on the roads in fully clothed manner, because clothes were denied to them in Mailadurai and in other surrounding areas, and making them sing national anthem. And she also very consciously, collected Dalit women in her area for anti-caste programs. So, which is very rare even during this time, because there was a conscious division brought in between Sudra women and Adi Dravida women by the ploy of the landlords over there, who were obviously leading the Congress movement, who were bringing in these divisions very consciously, mainly among the women, even among the women in terms of, ideal women and other women. All this was broken by Moovalur Ramamurdam. Let me end it with one classic statement about how this division was broken by Sudra women, feminist activists like Ramamurdam. Is in the 1930, when large number of prostitutes came out on the street, including Devadasi women, they were marching on the beach as part of the civil disobedience movement. Also in the 1922, Kalki writes about it in his Deviyarin Desaparvai, in that article. A large number of congressmen were embarrassed. They made a complaint to the committee that we cannot have in the forefront women who are considered to be, tabooed, sexually promiscuous women. And this sort of remarks, which angered Ramamurdam at various points of time, turned her against the Congress activist. And she has written in her memoirs that somehow Gandhi's, support for Devadasi women had not reached the mind and the sensibilities. It does not touch the sensibilities of congressmen in Tamil Nadu, and therefore, in Tamil Nadu, the national movement cannot grow, partly because it does not center women's interest in their agendas. So this is very tellingly far more very radical critique to my mind compared to even Periyar's critique of nationalists in Tamil Nadu at that particular time. So let me end it here for lack of time, or if I'm allowed to talk for some more time, or I would prefer question and answer session maybe, if possible. Is that fine?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So,
Yeah, or would you like me to go on a little more on the political ecology of resistance?
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You can continue. Yeah, you can continue, ma'am. Then we can
Yeah,
take
anyone?
up questions. Yeah, students, are you ready with your questions?
I'm not able to hear anyone. Hello? Yeah, sorry, maybe my system was going on and off. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question, ma'am.
Yeah, please.
Yes, ma'am. Throughout the ages, throughout all these modernizations in our society, directly or indirectly, in all the situations, women are targeted in
Yes.
one or the other way, in a negative way. Like even though we are seeing a lot of modernization, it's always like a suppression towards women.
Yes.
So one of the biggest problem is domestic violence.
Yes.
So even though they are going through a lot, even now set of women's like many are not ready to come out, and even though they are educated, they are so worried about opening up about that thing.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what is your thoughts regarding that, ma'am? Like what is
Yes.
stopping them? What is your thoughts regarding that?
Yeah. This is again a complex issue, but as you point out, as all of us can observe, unfortunately, Tamil Nadu state ranks as one of the 5 states in domestic violence cases. While we see there is a considerable reduction of public violence against women in Tamil Nadu, the reversal is something that disturbs us. That is the domestic violence. Now, here I would like to say something about the political economy of marriage and conjugality, and the way in which the women's status prevails in, particularly in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is considered to be one of the foremost developed state, just like Maharashtra. Now, what is important here to note is that while education and employment status of women have gone, we have also noticed a very disturbing trend as it is available in the periodic labor force survey, in a very recent surveys as well. Withdrawal of women from work has been very significant. In the sense, while the ratio of sex ratio of women's education has gone up, women entering higher education has been significant, but the reversal trend in the employment opportunities is very disturbing trend, partly because the manner in which they are getting pushed into home in the domestic sphere as unpaid laborers. Why this is so? One, there is a lack of opportunity for a matching kind of employment opportunity for the kind of higher education they access. There's one possibility that they are not able to, there's quite a bit of underemployment of women considering their education level. That's one possibility. That is because there is an occupational sex segregation which happens in the work sphere, where women are considered only to be secondary workers in large scale, especially in the case of unorganized sector and informal sector, etc. This is where a cluster of women are working now. 90% of women, almost 85% of women work in informal sector. Now, combined with this low paid, very flexible work scenario, they have to do unpaid labor at home. And especially with lack of, there's a kind of aspiration for middle class mobility and what you call as modernization, etc. There is this whole burden on women to educate the children and, ensure the entire care work is the cost of care work is reduced within these families by women themselves. They bear the entire responsibilities of care work and children's education. In addition to, if they can earn for the family, they are clustered into informal labor force. Now, besides this, the domestic violence has become significant because we are noticing in the labor force survey itself a large scale unemployment among men is becoming significant in Tamil Nadu. And there is another trend. The welfare programs in Tamil Nadu target women as beneficiaries. These two aspects has bearing on the crisis of masculinity. The crisis of masculinity is far more complex issue where in the absence of men becoming significant provider for the families anymore, there is a sense of emasculation among men. Taking to alcoholism, beating of wives are becoming a kind of reaction to a reduced sense of masculinity, which a large number of men in Tamil Nadu today share as sense of emasculation. So these are the kind of reasons we can adduce as part of the trend of increasing domestic violence against women. But this is not in itself satisfactory to understand a deferred kind of trend for different districts. This we have to go into details. Yes, is it clear, Josephine?
Yes, ma'am, it is clear,
Yeah.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions? It need not.
Madam,
Yeah.
Ma'am,
madam,
Yeah.
ma'am,
I'm there. Tell me.
good evening, ma'am.
Vishak, you can ask first.
Good evening, madam. I'm Vishak, a second year postgraduate student, history department.
Yes.
Thank you for the enriching and enlightening lecture.
Yes.
And my question is, if we look at the twin aspects of caste and patriarchy, which operates within the labyrinth of democracy, how far has the ethnographic approach in the contemporary era played an instrumental role in order to tease out the so-called pluralistic views of the gender dimensions of the so-called quotidian life, if you look at the Dalit women? That is my question.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's very, very important. I think what is important here is that we know patriarchy is something, inherent to caste society. It's a very specific form of patriarchy. While we are not saying, there are several kinds of patriarchy, peasant patriarchy and capitalist patriarchy and Brahminic patriarchy. And Brahminic patriarchy is very closely linked with what we are talking about as in the caste society as such. The question here is that you are asking is about the demography. One of the important things that we have not really deviated from the core Hindutva, Hindu values of, reproduction. By and large, in the Hindu majoritarian perception and the practices of caste society. Now, what happens here is that a large population of lower caste women and their kind of a reproduction is considered to be a waste production. I'm not saying it as something like a very generic waste. It's very specifically comes out in historical discourses about population control and the eugenic ideas of who should produce, whose social reproduction or whose production, whose reproduction carries particular significance and value. And here, of course, the Manu's idea was very clear that the dominant caste women have to be closely guarded, protected, and because the way in which the virility and the reproduction, all that of the dominant caste has a very significance for sustenance of the caste system. Whereas the lower caste woman, her reproduction is about large army of labors. If at all the labor has to be virile, then Manu grants that there is a possibility for also pratiloma marriages granted only for men, the dominant caste men. Now, if this is the case, at one point of time, the entire population control program of India was based on the idea that the illiterate lower caste men and women are the target for family planning program. 1970s have seen the Congress family planning program was completely based on, reproductive control of the lower caste in Bihar, UP, even in Tamil Nadu. And then what we find, a dramatic change happens in the neoliberal era with the BJP government bringing in a new bill of surrogacy bill. Here, suddenly, the argument about reproduction becoming a very important, significant factor for lower caste women to take to surrogacy. That they have become the subject of reproduction, where it's with the use of modern technology, where the significance about reproduction has been emphasized. All of a sudden, those women who have been targeted for birth control have become now target to reproduce more, but for other purposes, as surrogate mother for the international market. Now, this is the irony of the location of caste and the patriarchal perception of reproduction that informs a kind of a very clearly a discriminated perceptions about production and reproduction of lower caste women. Does that make sense? Or are you trying to ask something else about demography here?
No, madam, this is what I just wanted to, because in this
Yeah.
contemporary era where we use a lot of fusions of all the various aspects, especially since it is a democracy, I just wanted to make it clear. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. For instance, the whole fertility control program is coming through the back door saying that we still need a fertility control. But
Yes,
why do we need? TFR is very low everywhere across the country, and particularly Tamil Nadu now is going on the reverse. We will have a shortage of human resource. Now, yet, in the name of women making a choice, they still have some kind of subtle family planning program. So, along with modernization, it has been made into women's choice that women themselves will go for family planning. And sterilization, particularly, it is also targeting women. Yeah. So somebody had asked something on the chat, if I can look at it. Kalishwaran, of course, we can't deny the fact caste used to oppress women from time immemorial, but also clinical psychologists like Jordan Peterson puts forward that women are paid less for the same work because they are more agreeable. What are your thoughts on this research statement of his man? Well, I don't know whether it can be considered to be a very conclusive research statement here, especially a clinical psychologist, because we are all social scientists who would go by differential perceptions from taking into context women's own perception from different conditions. One which is very clear, that the context in which women are paid less is informed by patriarchal perception about women's contribution in the economy. So it's not that what comes first. It is because they are not recognized for the domestic work that they do. It is because it's largely unpaid. When they compete in the market outside for paid work, their non-recognition of contribution that they make at home is taken into account to reduce their contribution in the public sphere. This is why the argument about the politics of recognition of women's contribution, both in production and reproduction, may add to re-recognition of women's paid work in a far more significant way. Why should for the same work women are paid less? What is the kind of rationality? It is not because women make a choice to be paid less. Not that women are saying pay me less when I do the same 12 hours of work. What is that? It contributes to the de-recognition of women's contribution in the public sphere. It's not women's choice at all. So there's something in the whole here. Women are paid less because women prefer those work. Yes, women prefer flexible work. Women prefer, half-paid work. Why? Because the state is not providing any infrastructure for daycare centers, for care work at home. All that is borne by women. And the male mentality in this household has not changed. As there is a mobility across caste, the aspiration of men within this family is to domesticate women. This is the irony of caste mobility. As the caste goes up in the ladder of status, we find that it is inversely related to women's status. Historically, it is true. We have the case, Nadar case history. When the Shanas turned Nadas, they domesticated women in a far more significant way. And the dowries practice was brought in, where there were significant changes to immobilize and domesticate women happened in several caste groups. This is how the caste patriarchy worked to control and regulate female sexuality and mobility, and then allow them to accept certain kind of low payment compared to men. Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes.
It was really an enriching session, ma'am. You mentioned about few works, so I thought I will just add a literary work to it. It is a short story written by Jayaganthan called Agni Pravesam. He wrote that story back in 1970s when the women were treated below men even now. So it's a story which talks about a girl, a Brahmin girl who gets raped, and she comes back home and she tells that to her mom, and her mom initially gets upset and she cries a lot, but then she sits and thinks for some time and then realizes, and she tells her daughter that purity and chastity or whatever it is, it lies in your mind and not in your. So I thought I will just add it to it.
Yeah, very important, because I think for the dominant caste women, these are the values which became a capital in some sense to gain a particular status both within the family and also to control other women, to take these as distinct quality to differentiate themselves from other women. The other women could not afford to, sort of essentialize and, make chastity and, sexual purity as something, qualities to, as feminine qualities to distinguish themselves. They cannot afford to do that. This is exactly in the Sudra stories and as well as in Ramamadam story, in her own memoir comes out. Satanathan for himself very clearly says his grandmother, who was traditionally married to a caste relative, she left that family, she left that husband because he was utterly not doing anything in the family, and she was kept as a concubine for some landlord or some relatively better off man of a different caste. And his mother born out of that particular family, but not taken into that family. So the grandmother and the mother, all these women live together, but they've had a kind of dysfunctional family. The ideal Brahmanical family is not prevalent. It's not available for Sudra women. So they have to work very hard in the field to earn their own money. They have to also bear the, abuses, for their sexual impurity. And added to this is the colonial, designation of these women as dangerous women. So there were a lot of these kind of indignities and disrespect and, humility through which these women were shaping their womanhood, which is vastly different from Brahmin household. I'm not saying that the Brahmin women did not suffer the indignities. That's a different kind of a story altogether, where they premised these ideals, that is chastity and other things, as part of making of womanhood. So it's a vast difference altogether. Yeah.
Ma'am, there's one more question in the chat box.
Yes. Sorry. I'm trying to see. Yeah. A rape is a rape. Why is caste brought into it? For instance, the Hathras case, the Kashmiri case, where the Dalit girl was raped by Pandits. What are your opinion on this? Absolutely. I don't think rape is a rape. Rape is a violence. All the same, what are the conditions under which a mass scale of, rape is taking place? We need to see that increasingly the protection offered to dominant caste women is not available to Dalit women and women in the, in the conflict areas, the Muslim women who have been made vulnerable. So our question here is, why are rape becoming a kind of everyday event in areas and among the lower caste, young women whose protection has to be the state's priority? It's not there. So what we also see here is rape has been used as a way to also subordinate communities historically For instance, take the Sindoor rape case or Bodhi riot, where we have found whenever caste conflicts and riots have taken place, upper caste men have raped Dalit women in order to show that Dalit men and women are under their control, in order to show the power of masculinity. So therefore, what we find is that the rape as part of this kind of control and power is also about how the state has not offered sufficient protection, sufficient kind of stringent laws to protect the lower caste women and women in the conflict areas. Yes. Yes, somebody has raised hand.
Russell, do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. Then we'll wind up with this, ma'am.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, ma'am. We are beyond grateful to you for making us understand what Dravidian feminism is all about. We assure you that we'll carry forward your ideas on the topic and apply it wherever we can in our academic endeavors, ma'am. We are also grateful to you, ma'am, for being a sport and answering all our questions earnestly. Stalwarts like you are definitely the need of the hour, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Sorry, there's again, Russell has raised a hand. Is there some question here? I can answer, no problem.
Yes, ma'am, sure. Russell, do you have a question?
Or by mistake?
Ma'am, by mistake, he might have. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you once again, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm very happy. Sorry, yeah, somebody else?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to have been here, but it's a bit fragmented and disjointed. But all the same, this conversation can continue in some other form. I'm welcome to, sort of talk to you all in another forum, in another context as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our pleasure, ma'am.
Yeah.
The way to develop the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. I derive utmost joy and contentment in inviting the nightingale of our department, Dr. Anuradha, head of the Department of History, to propose the formal vote of thanks. Please, ma'am.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I have to thank ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Anandi, for such a thought-provoking presentation. I must really thank you for making yourself available to be here with us. First of all, to accept our invite, and the way you have presented your topic, the way you have taken up the questions and answered the questions, we really thank you, ma'am. Thank you for sparing your valuable time and so patiently taking the questions. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and we look forward to an occasion where we can have you in person in the campus, and the discussion can continue. And I would also like to take a few minutes of your time, because I would like to propose a formal vote of thanks to end this day's, that is a conference, this 2-day conference. So it is my privilege to render thanks to everyone who has made this 2-day conference a reality. So first and foremost, I thank God Almighty for His grace, guidance, providence, which has led us thus far. I thank the management of Loyola, for the rector, for the secretary, for the principal, for their constant support and encouragement. I also thank the Office of Media Relations for all the enablement they have provided us. My sincere thanks to all our resource persons, Dr. Sainath, Dr. Gangadharan, Dr. Anandi, who delivered the special lecture, and Dr. Neeta Kanpekar, Dr. M.N. Rajesh, Dr. Chandani V, and Dr. Lakshmanan, who chaired the 4 sessions of the conference. Especially Dr. Neeta, I think now Dr. Neeta is also present even in the session. So she was with us for all the sessions, encouraged and motivated our students, and she also encouraged the paper presenters very much. Thank you, Dr. Neeta. I am greatly indebted. Thank you, ma'am. I'm greatly indebted to all these stalwarts. They readily accepted our invite, made themselves available, took all the effort to make their presentation and address such an important theme. Each of them have left with us a wealth of knowledge and inspired each of us to keep the quest for knowledge alive. Thank you. Thank you each to all the resource persons. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry.
Yes,
I just wanted to tell you that there is this book by Anupama Rao, edited, very recent book, Gender,
Yes,
Caste and the Imagination of Equality.
Yes, ma'am.
So yeah, you can you can have it in your library, and this is a collection of articles related to caste and gender.
Yes, ma'am, definitely.
Yeah.
We also have introduced a PG paper on women. So maybe
Okay,
we will use it for that as well, ma'am.
Yes.
So the entire process was possible due to the enthusiastic support we received from the participants of this conference. Your energetic, serious, committed paper presentations, the presenters who have readily obliged and helped us in the smooth conduct of the conference. Sincere thanks to all the paper presenters and all the very best to keep your research going. Our work is not yet over. We want to see it in the form of a publication. And again, I request you all to support us to make it happen at the earliest. Thank you all. My colleagues in the Department of History, I would term them my backbone. They are the people who enable me to stand tall. Each of them have played a vital role, right from the inception of the idea of the conference, framing the theme, putting down the sub-themes, inviting the resource person. It is they without whose support this would not have been a reality. I thank Professor Ranganathan, the coordinator of Shift 2, Dr. Princess, Dr. Arpuda Selvi, Dr. Biju Joseph, Mr. Ahilan, Dr. Xavier, Ms. Karolia, Mr. Muthuraman, Mr. Abdul, Mr. Jeevit, Mr. Harish, Ms. Monica, and Mr. Naresh. The entire conference is the fruit of a teamwork, and I thank my team for the dedicated, untiring, and enthusiastic support. Thank you all. My humble and sincere thanks to Dr. Bernard Sami, as I told yesterday, our teacher, our mentor, for his constant guidance and motivation. I thank the student participants who have been attending the two-day proceedings in large numbers. Thank you for your support. Once again, my sincere thanks to all of you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Your straightforward message of gratitude holds more weight than the typical thank you. We are indebted to you, ma'am, for leading us from the front for the past 2 days with aplomb. Thanks a ton, ma'am, for everything. There's no real ending. It's just a place where you stop the story. On behalf of the Department of History, I once again take this opportunity to thank all of you for the successful conduct of the 7th Annual Conference of the Loyola Forum for Historical Research. It's one thing to sit through a riveting lecture and quite another to follow formal presentations for hours together. Thank you for paying such remarkable attention, students. Your dedication and commitment to the cause is appreciated. You're now required to fill up the Google Forms to avail your certificates. The link for the form is in the chat box. Thank you so much and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Anuradha.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks a
yeah,
lot, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yes. So students, kindly fill up the feedback form and you can get your certificates. Paper presenters, we will give you your paper presentation certificate as a hard copy. We will send it across to your institution or we will deliver it to you in hand. Thank you all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Share the link again.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Arpita?
Ma'am, can you just share the link again? It's
Yeah,
not opening up.
definitely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ravindranath.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm a Gokul stream of UH 69, ma'am.
Yes, Gokul. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Kishore.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a
ma'am.
lot. Thank you all for your support.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Nitaji. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Subhash.
Ma'am, thank you for
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Vivek. So everybody has taken the feedback form. Can we close the meeting?